Hello everyone, welcome to Cook With Me and a very happy Valentine's Day. I've heard from a couple of you that have messaged me or sent me an email and said, why are you doing one of these on Valentine's Day? And also, I will be surprised if anyone will be even online with me on Valentine's Day. But that's all right, because I chose that this Valentine's Day, I wanted to say I love you to my crew, which is you guys. And I wanted to show you one of these really cool recipes. It's a little bit decadent, and it pretty much had to be a pretty special occasion for me to want to get into this level of decadence. The good news is tonight's dish that we're going to be making is going to be kept in the freezer. So hopefully it's going to last you a bit longer because of that, a little bit out of sight, out of mind going on there. But it is decadent, and yet I guess you could say the healthier version of decadent. So on that happy Valentine's Day note, while you guys are logging in, give me a little hello. Let me know if you are wonderfully spending your Valentine's Day with me tonight, and whether or not who else is in the kitchen with you. And if you're watching this on the recorded one, I would still love to hear maybe how you spent your Valentine's Day instead. I'll completely understand. So as far as getting into the kitchen tonight for this Valentine's Day, I also wanted to bring up, for those of you that are not celebrating this with a lover of yours, apparently there's a new trend called Galentine's Day. And so if you're getting together with a good girlfriend and just hanging out and having a good time, then maybe tonight you're making chocolate peanut butter pie. All right, so chocolate peanut butter pie. Now this version of this recipe is, I guess what you could say, closest to when you go to a cafe and you order kind of one of the raw vegan desserts, or one of those special little individual tarts that are done up in the special display cabinet. Now this is kind of a bit of an insight as to what goes into those kind of individual but decadent individual desserts, okay? So this is going to be dairy free, it's gluten free. Obviously we're not using too heavily, well, I shouldn't say that, we're using rice malt syrup, but I'm going to use organic rice malt syrup. And we're just kind of watching how much we use of that. Instead, I'm going to be trying to use more medjool dates, so it still comes with a bit of the fiber naturally from the fruit. And also we're going to reduce that down and up the satiety of it, so that you hopefully only need a little bit. So as you might have seen already on the recipe, this is a 24 serving kind of dish, okay? So it's a big batch. However, it's also very rich, so you really don't need big pieces at all, which is why I recommend you cut it up, leave it in the freezer, maybe at the back of the freezer to make it that little bit extra hard to go in for a snack. And then you have that little sweet treat, which hopefully will prevent you from getting anything worse or full of numbers and additives and preservatives and other stuff that we don't want. At least you're going to be making it out of whole foods. All right, so on that note, let's get straight into it. Okay, well, first of all, you guys are going to need a good machine. Now, when I say good, it's not absolutely critical. You can get away with a regular food processor or blender. However, if you want that super smooth, creamy texture that you're used to at the cafes, you're going to need a high-speed blender. Okay, now don't let that discourage you from making this recipe. It's just going to mean that yours will be slightly more textured, which is okay, and especially if you've never had it before, you might have no point of difference, no point of reference. So that's okay. Just know that it's going to have a slight bit more texture than if you're using a high power blender, and we're definitely going to need the use of the stick for the high power blender so we can keep it really thick and still get that smooth consistency. Okay, so it's pretty much only the middle layer that you'll notice it in. The bottom layer is excellent in a regular old food processor. As a matter of fact, if I wasn't being so lazy, I would normally do this with two different machines, because the bottom layer is really good with a food processor and the middle layer is really good with a blender. Top layer, best in the blender, okay? So that's a lot of information to start out with. Let's make sure you're all set up, okay? So as far as the container that you're going to be putting it in, now I've said that it's about a 30 centimeter container and approximately 3 centimeters deep. Now this is probably only 1.5 centimeters deep. So this is not enough for the entire dish, okay? We need about 3 centimeters deep just for the pure volume of what we've got in this recipe. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one big one, and I'm going to make two little guys just as a little bonus, a little sample. And these are, I guess, yeah, just different amounts of serving. So you can either do it all in one, you can do it all in little ones, or you can just kind of do the combination until you get all of the ingredients used up. Now, worst case scenario, you put too much base down and you don't even it out. It's okay. You might end up with one little sacrificial anode that only has the middle layer and the top layer. That's okay. Okay, you can have as many different pieces to this as you want. It doesn't have to be done in one dish. As a matter of fact, it's probably better if you don't do it in one dish, because then you get a little taster. just to make sure it's right before you serve it for everyone. Okay, so those are the dishes that I'm going to be using. All right, let's begin. It's not too complicated. However, there's a few little niche things that I want to show you along the way. And keep in mind that this recipe is quite indicative of most of your sort of raw desserts, your kind of raw vegan desserts. Technically speaking, this is not 100% raw because we're going to be using tofu, but for the most part, it's mostly a raw dessert. Okay, let's get into it. We're going to need, like I said, the blender or the food processor, whichever you're wanting to use. If you're using a blender though, we're going to have to be really careful to just pulse it a few times because we don't want that to turn to, I guess, a paste when we do that. So the first layer, nothing complicated. We're going to put all the ingredients from the first layer into the blender to begin with. Okay, so we want to start off with about a cup of cashews. Okay, ideally, well, actually either way, roasted cashews or raw cashews, either way, that's going to work. So there's a half cup. And there's 1 cup. Okay. Then we want the same, so 1 cup with your desiccated coconut. Now, if you've only got flaked coconut, then that's okay. You can still use that, but you're going to need to use quite a bit more, so probably double it. So you'd want at least 2 cups of the flaked coconut, because by the time that breaks down, it's going to need a bit more volume to make up for the 1 cup of desiccated equivalent. Okay. Then we're going to need about half a cup of macadamias. Now, you don't absolutely have to put this in. This is that little luxurious kind of ingredient that makes it so special and I guess a favorite of mine. So we can use macadamias. You could use sunflower seeds. You could use pecans. That would be beautiful. Even walnuts maybe would be another different addition you could try. Okay. So one thing I want you guys to pick up on this is just how many substitutions there are for this type of dessert. Okay, you have ultimate kind of creativity potential with this. So even if you're out of cashews, for example, I guess your next best base to that could be potentially almonds. Hopefully you've got some activated almonds. You could do a combination of different nuts. So maybe you put in some sunflower seeds, some pepitas, a couple of Brazil nuts, maybe a couple of pecans or walnuts to make up a bit of a combo as well. Okay, this is probably the most desserty version because they're kind of the more luxurious of the nuts that we can be putting in. Oh, even hazelnuts. Hazelnuts would be amazing. Okay, a little bit of coconut oil. Now this is going to help to set it once it's cold, and it's going to help to hold it together. So we only need about 2 tablespoons of it, and I'm using. You can either use extra virgin or virgin. If you've only got cooking coconut oil, that's okay too. But we want about 2 tablespoons of that guy. Okay. And then we want 2 medjool dates. Now, if you're not familiar with the medjool dates, these have been given that extra name to distinguish between the fully dried dates. So I'll just show you what I mean here. So these have not been fully dehydrated. These are only partially dried. Okay, so these ones you will definitely have to take the pit out. Do remember that step. I promise you it's the loudest noise you'll ever hear in your blender, and they do not break down. So you will be breaking your teeth if you end up with a pit in your dessert. Okay, so definitely take those pits out. We're going to go to the medjool dates, and we're going to be using more of the medjool dates in the top layer, so keep them handy. Okay, and then the salt. Now you might be wondering, oh man, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt in the base. Well, if you've ever had like a salted caramel dessert, something like that, this is not quite that salty, but it does really benefit from that little bit of kick, especially in combination with the peanut butter flavor and the chocolate. Okay, so let's try and get a full measure. Don't just kind of eyeball this one. Let's get this one right because it has the ability to kind of make or break your dish. Okay, so we're gonna, if we don't have a 3/4 teaspoon measure, I'm gonna use the half plus the quarter. Okay, so we do want 3/4 of salt. We wanna make sure those are level. So that's the half plus the quarter. There's our 3/4. Okay. All right, so that's all the ingredients for the base layer. So now the key with whatever machine you're using is to blitz it just so that we get an even meal texture. Okay, so we want it to start sticking together, but we don't want to start creating paste. So I'm just going to blitz it, or pulse it, I guess the term is on this thing. Pulse it a few times, and hopefully we'll get the texture that we're after. And then in between, you might need to give it a little shake so that we don't get paste forming down the bottom. Okay. Come on, there we go. So as soon as it starts to kind of not move anything around, then we need to do that for it. And this is where a food processor makes it a lot easier. But just for the sake of dishes, we're going to do it this way. Okay, we are nearly there. So we still have a few little chunky bits. If you'll see in there, we still have a few whole macadamias. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on and see if I can stir that up around the edges a little bit. Maybe with this first. We're so close to the texture that we want. All right, I think that should be good. Even if we get a little bit of chunks, that's okay in the base. It's going to be quite nice to be able to bite into that. We just don't want anything too big. So see how it's starting to kind of crumb together already? See how kind of sticky it already is? That's exactly what we're after, because that's going to help it hold once we pack it down in the base. Okay, so let's pull out the containers that you're going to use, and we'll just kind of try to evenly distribute it between the dishes for now. So just kind of eyeballing that. It might not look like you have enough, but it does pack down quite well, and we don't need this layer to be too thick. So just go evenly between the dishes, approximately. Does that look about right? I think we are nearly good, and the rest can go back in here. So you're not quite going to the stage of extracting the oils from the nuts here, because then we'd be creating kind of like our own nut butter, which is not what we're after here. Okay, and then from this point, it's easiest if we use the back of a spoon to flatten it down. So it's kind of a spreading while pressing, and once it gets evenly flat, then it's going to start to hold better, because it's going to be pushing against each other all the way around the dish. So we just kind of go even. Now if you really want to speed this up and you kind of go the pro techniques, you could put some baking paper down and then press it down flat with a flat cutting board or a flat plate, or even just your hands on top of that. Okay, so I'm just going to do, and if that starts to stick, then that's your backup option, is that we put some paper down. Actually, I might as well just show you. Let's do that. Okay. Okay, so we put some paper down, and then it's quite easy to just get in there with your hands and press it down nice and firm. You can go around the edges, make sure the edges are down, or you can take the time and do that with a spoon. If you've got kids helping, then maybe that's a good task for them to take a little bit longer with while you get the next layer ready. Okay, so we'll do the same in here. You can go first with the spoon. And it doesn't need to be super perfect here, but we do kind of want to compress any of the bits that still look a bit crumbly, just to get that stick happening so that when you go to take it out, you're not going to have anything falling apart on you. There we go. So it's really cool when you start doing this type of thing from scratch. There's a lot of things that you gain insights on, and one of those insights you might be getting from today is just how much for example, sweetness has to go in, and then when you taste it, you can compare to your favorite dessert that you get at a cafe or something, and you might go, oh my goodness, like, I know how much sugar I put into this, or sweet things, and this is what it tastes like. I can only imagine how much are in most of the traditional ones in the cafes. Okay, that's layer one, done. So at this point, if you have enough time up your sleeve, you could put them in the freezer. Otherwise, we'll put them aside, and we'll move on to layer number two, which for some of you might be the most interesting layer, because maybe you've never actually had tofu before, let alone in a sweet dessert. So definitely when you buy tofu, please try to get organic tofu at all times. It is very important when it comes to the soy products. Okay, and yeah, definitely try to get organic. This is a firm tofu, and this is what the recipe has been designed for. If you can only get organic, for example, in the medium or the silken, silken probably will not work for this layer, but medium you could get away with. you would just be needing to add quite a bit less of the coconut cream, okay? So that's one thing you can do as an option. But this is going to be our base for the dish. This is kind of where the volume comes from. And now to this, we're going to add the peanut and kind of the sweet flavor of the cream inside. So it's about a cup of peanut butter. Now, it's a lot of peanut butter. And if you don't have that much peanut butter on hand, or you thought you had a cup but you didn't, then definitely feel free to use tahini as well, or any other nut butter that you have on hand. If you wanted to make this a nut-free recipe, then you could definitely look at using a combination of, say, sunflower seed butter and tahini as well. Okay, so I'm just going to pour this in. That'll be a bit easier. So this is a nice organic peanut butter that I get in the bulk tub. So I buy it by the 2 kilo tub, and I keep this thing full in the fridge, just because I find it's easier than having to go to the shops all the time to get peanut butter. So there's, oh, I meant to use half a cup of tahini. Well, next time. Okay, so there's the 1 cup of nut butter, any combination that you want. And hopefully you guys are already using one of these devices, it's a silicone spatula, and just so that we don't get any waste. Okay, so we're going to get all that peanut butter out of there into our dessert, not into the bin or down the drain. There we go. Okay, so this is my favorite kitchen tool right here. If you haven't already got one of these, I would highly recommend it. Notice how there's no seam, so it's not silicone and then wood down the bottom. It's seamless, so there's no mold potential at the seam. Okay, my favorite kitchen tool right there. All right, so that's our peanut butter element. Now we need a little bit of sweetness, okay, and preferably we need like a sticky liquid sweetness. So I would prefer if you could be using an organic rice malt syrup as part of it, and then also a real maple syrup. Very sticky. Okay. Now when I say a real maple syrup, I do mean like real Canadian maple, not maple flavored syrup, which you've probably heard me speak about before. But maple flavored syrup has not a single drop of maple syrup in it. It's just flavored and colored and made to look that way. Okay, and then as far as the body goes, the body knows the difference. So let's try and make sure we always go cheers to the great Canadian maple. Let's go about 4 tablespoons of each. So we're going to go 4 tablespoons of the maple and 4 tablespoons of the rice malt syrup. Now rice malt syrup has kind of gained in popularity in the last, I guess, couple of years, mostly because of the sugar-free movement. And the reason why it's gained in popularity is because this rice malt syrup is seen to have 0 fructose. And, you know, fructose is arguably the worser of the two between glucose and fructose. Okay, so this one's fructose free. The only thing just to kind of keep in mind is that I know that it's fructose free. However, it still is highly processed to get to this level. Okay, probably better than a lot of other things, arguably, that we could be using instead. And also, you know, when in terms of maple syrup, I know maple syrup costs more. It also comes with other benefits, okay, because it's a lot more natural. It's come directly from the tree. So I'm just using half and half, just to get a bit of a balance. And the other thing I wanted to say is before, hopefully you haven't added all that in there yet, if you have a very adjusted sugar palate. Now, chances are if you have a really adjusted sugar palate, you're not going to be making this meal. Or dessert. Please don't have this as a meal. Okay, but if not, this is kind of what I'd say is a medium amount of sweetness, believe it or not. So the ones in the cafes are going to be much sweeter than this, just as a bit of a heads up. So if you feel like you need to have quite a sweet tooth on this one, you might want to add an extra tablespoon of each. Otherwise, try it like this first, and then next time you might need to adjust it. Ideally, we're adjusting your palate, not the recipe. Okay, so ideally we're going to get you to the point where you feel like this is, whoa, that's so sweet. That would be the ideal reaction. Okay, and then from there you can keep peeling back the amount of sweeteners that you put in things. Okay, so those are the 2 sweeteners we're going to be using. Then we need about 1/3 cup of coconut cream. Ideally it's coconut cream, not coconut milk. Either would be fine, just to give that extra little bit of, I guess, flavor to sort of like, because tofu is a blank slate, right? Tofu that's got no no flavor. If anything, some people might think it's not that desirable of a flavor on its own. So not to say that this is masking it, it's almost just giving it something. And that little touch of coconut, you're certainly not going to be able to detect coconutiness, but that's going to help balance out the flavor overall. All right, and then some vanilla, actually quite a bit of vanilla. So we want about 1.5 teaspoons. Now, whatever kind of vanilla you're using, it should be around about the 1.5 teaspoons mark. I've got some nice powdered vanilla here, so I'm going to use 1 teaspoon and about 1/2, maybe a little bit more because I love it. And by using the powdered one, you actually kind of get that speckled look in like the vanilla bean ice creams you see, like that little speckle look. You may or may not see it in this dish, but that's one of my favorite vanillas, and I've got lots of it. So, and then a little pinch of salt in this one too. So a bit more than a pinch, probably about 1/2 teaspoon. Okay. And again, just so you know, just so you have a reference point. First time you make any recipe, guys, do it exactly, as in measure it properly, because then you have a reference point. Then you have some way to know whether or not you want to change it, tweak it, etc. So the first time you make a recipe, make sure you make it exact, and then you can take notes and decide how you want to tweak and change it after. Okay, now we are probably going to need a bit of water for this as well. So I'm just going to get some of that ready, and then we're going to add that just as much as we need, just to make the machine kind of get it to go really smooth. We don't want to add any more than we have to, just because otherwise it's going to be a bit too runny in the dessert. Okay, you ready? This is where the machine comes in handy. And the stick, we're definitely going to need the stick. Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm going to start with a couple of tablespoons of water. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go 1/4 cup of water, which is about 4 tablespoons. Okay, so there's our 4 tablespoons of water. And we'll keep going. We'll just give it a little break so we can scrape down the edges. Okay, so now you can probably understand why a lot of these desserts that you see in the cabinets kind of cost so much, is because you do have to do them in small batches. Most machines, I mean, even the most commercial machines, this is the max batch you could do without kind of burning out the engine. So this is what they're designed for. However, as you can tell, this is why why there's so much, I guess, labor and love that goes into those desserts. So we're just going to give it a little hand stir, and then we're going to keep that going. It's done a fairly good job so far. It's quite smooth. Okay, the good news is we don't have to do it too much longer, but I'm going to give that one more little go. Okay, and again, whatever machine you're using right now, maybe you just needed to add a little bit more liquid to it, and that's okay, because generally speaking, you're going to be serving this straight from the freezer. So that's okay if you needed to add a little bit more. Sneaky taste. Get in there. All right, last time, here we go. Okay, that is done. Look at how smooth that is. Okay, so it's pretty much just like a peanut butter cream. You can even see those vanilla specks I was talking about. So that's what we want. Okay, now this is again where your spatula is going to shine. We don't want to waste any of these bits of yumminess. Okay. And then again, even portions into our dishes. The fun bit is when we get to the end and we get to decorate. All right, so this is the thickness. So kind of have a look at how thick that is. That's what we're after. If it goes too much more than that, like I said, it'll still be okay, provided it's coming straight out of the freezer. But this is the thickness that we want to achieve, ideally, if we can. Okay, let's use the back of the spoon. It's always a bit easier to work with. And we're just gonna spread it around till it touches the edges, and that way we get a stick. There we go. Once it touches the edges, then it should behave for you. Okay, so now this layer, just a little bit more important for you to get this layer nice and flat, because the chocolate layer that's going to go on top of this is not super thick, okay, and it's going to settle basically in all the low places. So we just want to make sure there's just a little bit of extra care and attention to get this layer flat. And again, you can see why I made it a big batch. It's not so that you kind of eat it all in one shot. It's most people, you know, I get it. We're busy. We're, you know, time is of the essence nowadays. And if for people to go to this much effort, I guess, in a dessert, it's not normal for lots of people. So this is why A, I want to show you how to do it faster, and B, I guess, to make a big batch so that you're not having to do it regularly. You can just kind of hopefully ration and save it in the freezer to last you a bit longer. Okay, now I'm not going to actually take the time to spread these ones thin, but I just got to get it out of the blender so we can do the next layer. So I'm just gonna deposit that in there, nice and thick. Okay, so it's worth that extra little bit of pain. And like I say, you know, use the machine. Let the machine do the work. This is what they're designed for. This is not any thicker than a nut butter, and these machines are built to make peanut butter or almond butter, right? So this is okay. It's just kind of pushing it to its max volume. That's all it is. There we go. Okay, now notice how I didn't actually do any cleaning of the blender between layers, and you don't have to if you're using this spatula and you spend a little bit of extra time to kind of get it fairly clean with the spatula. Then we don't have to bother washing it in between. And then the stuff that we add for the chocolate layer is just going to kind of blend in with all the rest of it's in the bottom here. Okay, so I probably could have put a little bit more into this dish, is what I'm seeing now, which is why I should have taken my own advice and actually dolloped these in before I started spreading out the one of them. Okay, so do as I say, not as I do. And make sure you've got your even amounts in before you start spreading everything thin. How are you guys going out there? Curious to know how your peanut butter pie is looking, or maybe you're trying, you know, a totally different pie, like an almond butter pie with a hazelnut base. That would be kind of yummy. Okay, there. That's all the mucking around I'm going to do for now. And even with this much left in here, guys, come have a look at that. Even with that much left in there, we're still going to blend that into the top layer. So that's absolutely okay. We're just going to hide that in the chocolate, which is another advantage of doing light colors before you do the dark colors. Okay, I'm going to set those aside, do them later. Now, for the top layer, we are going to need some more medjool dates. So I might as well just get those cut up now to make sure we don't have any pits hiding on us. And again, coming back to the sweetness topic, I've called for 10. Normally when I make this, I tend to push it back to about 7 or 8. However, that's going to get pretty close to the borderline of, you know, it's not quite sweet enough, therefore you want another piece. And then, oh, I didn't have that much sugar in it, so I'll just have another piece. So sometimes there's this kind of happy medium between satisfying your craving, as in having enough sweetness in the dish, and not then having to go back for 3 slices. So I've got 9 dates there. I'm going to use 9. Probably if it's the first time you've done this, go the 10, and then you'll kind of have a reference for how we want to do that. So let's make sure we get 9, for me, 9 pits out of this. Otherwise, we're going to have to go looking in the blender. And it's funny, it might sound silly that you actually have to count them, but I promise you the one time that you don't, you'll get distracted. Somebody will call your name or some kids will run in. And next thing you know, you've got a pit in the blender, which is the pits. We do not want to bite into those. They're way too hard. Okay. Oh, and if you guys have never experienced medjool dates on their own, like if you're just buying the medjool dates just for this recipe, these are amazing 3 o'clock snacks. I just open them, take out the pit, and stuff them with tahini, usually, and have that as a snack. It's awesome. You're getting your calcium fix from the tahini, and it's generally sweet enough to kind of really grab those cravings. And that's all. I just generally don't need more than one, but even if you had a couple, probably way better off getting, well, you are way better off getting your sweetness from some form of fruit, even though that's the sweetest fruit, than you are any other form of processed sweetener, right? Okay, so those are our, well, I'm using 9 medjool dates. You can choose how many you want to use. We're going to need also some more coconut oil. Now keep in mind, this is the chocolate layer. So we're going to be using 1/4 cup of coconut oil this time. Okay, because we're going to kind of create a freezer-friendly chocolate. So we want 1/4 cup of coconut oil, and we want about 1/2 cup of coconut cream. So ideally, what I've measured out in that recipe, it should be less than a full tin. So you still have a little bit left over for your hot cuppa tomorrow. So there's our 1/2 cup of coconut cream into the pie. Bonus for later. All right. And we need a little bit more rice malt syrup and then our cacao. So look, you could definitely use maple syrup here instead of the rice malt syrup. The reason why I went with the rice malt syrup is because it's quite a bit less sweet than maple syrup. And then it's going to give us that nice stickiness from the syrup that we're after. So, you know, 3 tablespoons of this. If you were using maple, I'd probably only go 2 because it's going to get quite sweet otherwise. So even if you just have a little taste of that on its own, you'll see how it's a lot less sweet than glucose syrup, for example, or maple, and way less than honey. Okay, so let's get our tablespoon of that out. There we go. Everything's going to be sticky. And then the cacao. Now, hopefully you've got cacao, not cocoa, but either way, it's okay. Cocoa is just quite a bit more processed than cacao. So we want the one that has the double A instead of the double O. All right, so that's cacao. This is generally raw, and try to get organic if you can. And we're going to need 3/4 cup. Okay, so it's a fair bit, but this is what we're using to make the chocolate layer. Okay, and this is a fairly dark chocolate, not super dark. So it should be good for most palates. But if you wanted it to be really dark, you could add it a little bit more. So you could add kind of an extra 2 tablespoons if you wished. So I'm just going to eyeball the other 1/4 cup out of that, maybe a little bit more. There we go. Approximate. Okay, my favorite thing about the cacao is it makes everything tanned. All right, that's everything for that layer. That's pretty simple. We just need to make this super smooth. So let's employ our devices for that again. I'm just going to grab a different stick. Maybe not. Okay, let's give that one a little tidy up. All right. Okay, so bear with me here. I did have a little piece of that stick come off in, hopefully not my dish. So I'm going to find the other stick. 1 second. Let's get this happening. And then we're back in business. Okay, nice and super smooth. Here we go. You can tell there's kind of not everything that's going to blend it in, so let's give it a scrape down on the edges, and then we're going to go one more time just to make sure. So see how we've still got some kind of chunky bits? We want this to be super smooth. So we're going to lick our fingers. Making desserts, I tell you, it's a messy job. It's fun and it's good because as the cook, you get to clean up that mess with your fingers, like licking the beaters. There we go. So we'll go right down to the edges, incorporate all that one last time. Now, the longer you can blend this, especially if you're using a high power blender, the more the blades are going to heat everything up and the smoother it's going to get. Oh yes, there we go. Nice and smooth, but we still have that bit of thickness to it. That's what we're after. Okay, so it's thick, but nice and smooth. Oh, I'm so sticky. Okay, now let's try and get some of this onto our top layer here. And we'll spread it out as we go. So this one's going to be a lot easier if you can kind of get it evenly around, rather than all dumping it in the middle and then having to work it out after that. If you're absolutely having troubles with that, it's probably easier just to kind of dollop it on in individual spoonfuls around the pie. Or like I said, you could put it back in the blender and add just a touch more, maybe a bit of coconut cream or maybe a touch more coconut oil, just to give it that little bit more smoothness that we want. And I'm going to reserve some for the other pieces I have. All right, and I'm going to get a clean spoon so that we don't get any other color coming through that. Okay, so let's try and press that down evenly, keeping in mind that the smaller the dish that you use for this, so for example, if you were doing multiple of this size or smaller, like individual little cupcake sizes, this process is actually easier. It just takes a little bit more time because you have to do them individually. But it is easier than doing a whole big pie. So the key here is just to not touch the spoon down to the layer underneath. So I'm just kind of really floating on top of the chocolate, just touching it enough to move it where I want to move it. Okay. Again, maybe you're starting to develop a little bit of an appreciation for what goes into those desserts we can devour pretty quickly when we're out. And a little bit of evenness here is good. Okay, so then as you're sort of pressing this and flattening out the top layer, you can be having a think about if you want to garnish it or decorate it. Okay, being that it's Valentine's Day, I think it's appropriate that we put a little of extra effort into this, a little bit of extra love into our food, and we can garnish it. However, I'm not talking with hundreds and thousands of sprinkles. I'm talking kind of whole food garnishes. So some different options that you'd have here. You could go a little bit fancy. You could put a spin into it and add some, frozen blueberries or chocolate up your arm. You could get creative and do more of your kind of toasted coconut flakes. I've got a combination of a couple of things I'm going to use. I'm going to use some cacao nibs for that extra little bit of crunch. You could use some crushed peanuts, some other toasted nuts. Different colors would be kind of cool to put on there. And I've also got some leftover sprinkles, homemade sprinkles that I made from basically boiling down beetroot juice and then coloring desiccated coconut, which I will make a cook with me one day for you. But this is the fun bit. This is why I like doing desserts, because you get to be creative. And I think that food should be fun, because what's the point if you're just doing it and it feels like a chore when you do it? So let's make it fun. And I want to show you a way to make it fun. Now this is going a little bit OTT, but hey, it's a video, it's a demo. I want to show you this. It's pretty cool. I'm going to make myself some space. And we're going to do a couple of different things. Have you guys ever made yourself a stencil for decorating cakes with? I want to show you a quick way to do this. So you're going to need some baking paper. And ideally you've got a piece that's bigger than the dish that we're going to decorate. Okay, it does need to be bigger. And we're going to give ourselves a clean workspace here. Okay, so a piece of baking paper, bigger than the dish we're decorating. And you're going to need a sharp tipped knife. Okay, so ideally this is kind of like a pencil. Now you can freehand this, or you could pre-draw it with pencil if you wanted. But given that, like I said, it's Valentine's Day, I think I'm going to do a heart shape. So we have to put a fair bit of pressure on it. So you really want to make sure you're comfortable with the knife. And I'm going to kind of freehand a heart here. Hopefully we can get it in one piece, simply because then we can use it in two ways. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So move the paper instead of getting yourself awkward. And let's do the rest of our big love heart here. Now it doesn't have to be perfect because it's just a stencil. Okay, so this is just going to give us room to work on top of the pie. And like I said, I know I'm getting a little bit over the top here because normally I just eat that dessert plain, but I wanted to show you guys a few other little special things that I can't really talk about in the recipe because it's too kind of involved. Okay, so there's our one heart. Now, you can use this heart to put down so that you get, and you decorate everything around it rather than just what's under the heart. And then we can peel the heart off. I'll show you in a second. So instead of just having one heart, I want three. Let's do 3 different sizes. Let's do a little guy up the top. And again, just make sure you're comfortable with that tool. Who else is going to tackle this with me? I'm curious. You guys are probably all watching going, what is she doing? This is how much love goes into those desserts that you possibly take for granted when you get them out when you're at a cafe. Maybe you don't take them for granted, but maybe you just never really have had a full understanding of what's gone into them sometimes. And let's do another little one down here on a different angle. The other thing you can be using for garnishes, and especially on Valentine's Day, if you can get a hold of them, are some edible flowers. So those are always a good thing for decorating with. There we go. Okay. Now, only trick here is that we want to decorate it now because then the decorations are going to actually stick into the chocolate layer. However, if we put this whole stencil down on top of that right now, we're going to lose a lot of chocolate layer. So I want to show you kind of the other method. We're going to save this guy and we're going to start off with these little hearts first. Okay, so the only trick is we kind of got to get them in the right placement of where we've got this. So I'm going to try and get this guy down here and we'll just lightly lay it down. Okay, and then I'm just going to get myself a reference point so that I kind of want to go with that heart about there. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, and then this one is going to be on an angle about here. Okay, so they're kind of sticking down already, which is okay. We just want the edges down. It's the edges that are most important. And then this is kind of our protection layer. Okay, so now, getting a little bit fancy, I'm going to put white around the edges. So I'm going to put coconut flakes. Now you could put desiccated coconut. You could pre-toast these for a bit of a different effect. Okay, but I want to get white all the way around the edges. And it's okay if you cover them because we're just going to scrape them off. And then we're going to go on the inside color with a bit of red and a bit of chocolate. Okay, so this is probably going to be better if these are a little bit tinier, which you could achieve simply by toasting them and then crushing them a bit because they'll be nice and toasty, ready to crumble. Okay, and then we just need to take them off, push them off of the stencil so that we get a nice edge. So you really want the coconut to stick right around the edge of the stencil. Okay. So again, this would have been easier with smaller pieces of coconut. Desiccated would have been great here too. And let's try and flatten out into the edges. We want it to kind of stick in there so it doesn't move around on us, which is why we decorate while it's still thawed. And now, for all of you that I bring desserts to dinner parties or anything for, and now you'll know what goes into them. Me or anyone else for that matter, you'll know kind of what goes into these raw desserts. Okay, so that's that. So now we created our heart shape with those stencils. And again, just to reiterate, the smaller the pieces around the edges, the more this effect is going to really shine. But we really want to make sure that we've kind of secured around those edges with the white, and that's going to then create our shape. Okay, let's take the stencils off. So again, you're going to lose a little bit of chocolate here, but you can kind of scrape it down. There we go, didn't lose much. More for you later. Okay, and the only disadvantage to this, guys, and I'm very sorry, is that it's not going to be ready to eat for about another 4 hours. So it's going to have to be your Valentine's Day tomorrow dessert instead, which I'm sure most of you won't mind as long as you get to have some. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to scrape that one clean later and possibly eat it. All right, and then last but not least, now because we've already kind of got our shape established here, it's not super critical, but because we've already got the coconut down, then this isn't really going to stick. So we could put that over top, or we could just fill in the gaps. So it's entirely up to you. I didn't quite get my shapes right there. Pretty close, but not quite. So I'm going to do it without. Save this for another day. All right, so let's do the big one. Well, no, let's do the two little guys red. So these are my red sprinkles. Homemade beetroot desiccated coconut sprinkles. And I promise you, if kids were to get used to this being their only option for sprinkles, if they wanted sprinkles, then you wouldn't have the headaches and the problems with them complaining about not having their hundreds and thousands, especially if you can have the kids grow up not knowing any different. Okay, so this is all just coming down to, I've had some parents express to me that they kind of felt like they were depriving their child of something by not giving them the sprinkles that they felt were so special. But it's all in how you present it to a child. So if you present this as the much luckier option, the much more special option, then it's all in the mentality, it's all in the psychology. So if you think it's cool and if you present it that way and get a couple other people on board if you need to, then I promise you the kids will think the same. Okay, so it's all just in how we phrase and present that. Now, fun little trick. I am going to use some real chocolate, as in a bar of chocolate. And the reason for this is I'm going to get shaved chocolate. So we want to expose the end without unpeeling the whole bar, because our warm hands are going to melt it before we get to use it. So we just want to kind of peel back the bar. And then you can do a couple of different options. So if you've got a really good veggie peeler, okay, we can put some nice shaves. See how that kind of does a beautiful shape in there. And this is why the extra stencil on top is sometimes good, because this can kind of go everywhere sometimes. So I'm just going to do a pile in the middle, and then I'm going to distribute it afterwards. Or you can get out your microplane, and you can do really fine shavings of chocolate like that. But I like the effect of a veggie peeler. Oh my God, this is the most decadent dessert I've made in probably many years. Okay, and let's spread those ones out, and then we're going to finish that off with a little bit of cacao nibs for a little bit of extra crunch. And then we have our Valentine's Day decorated chocolate peanut butter pie. Wow. Okay, let's really accentuate those edges of our heart. I wonder who's going to get to eat this. Who's coming over? I feel like I can't cut into it now. It's so pretty. Anyways, this is just me having fun. This is my version of fun. So hopefully you guys have been able to get a little bit of that as well. And there we go. So again, the more we kind of define our edges with our coconut, the easier it is to define the shapes of the heart. But I'm going to call that good. So Happy Valentine's Day. For all of my fellow gals out there, happy Galentine's Day. And in 4 hours, you guys can enjoy your own chocolate peanut butter pie. Thank you so much for being online or Cook With Me, whether you're doing this on the Valentine's Day or after. Thank you for being on, and I will see you next on Cook With Me Live.